Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. May all the peace and blessings of the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be on all of us. Today, as you can see, I want us to dive and navigate through the human brain. We look at the anatomy of the human brain, and if time will allow us, we also look a bit of the physiology of the brain as well. Now class, as you can see, let's look at the human brain and its composition first, and each part, what does it possess. Now class, as you can see that the human brain is a delicate nervous organ encased in a bony structure that is known as the skull. And therefore class, the brain is encased, or rather is enveloped by the skull or the cranium. And the brain is one among the organs in the central nervous system. And we know that the central nervous system is composed of the brain, the spinal cord, and the associated nerves. And these associated nerves are the cranial nerves and the spinal and the peripheral nerves. Now class, we say that the brain is a delicate nervous organ which is encased in a bony structure that is the skull, or rather sometimes known as the cranium. Now let's look at the brain. The brain again is covered by membranes. Let's look at the membrane coverage, or rather the membranes covering the brain. The first membrane covering the brain is called the dura mater. It is the tough outer membrane covering the brain and the spinal cord of vertebrates. It is richly supplied with blood capillaries. The next membrane covering the brain is called the pia mater. It is the innermost membrane covering the spinal cord and the blood capillaries. Now, in between these two brains, in between these two membranes, we have a narrow space. In between these two membranes, between the outermost membrane, that is the dura mater, and the innermost membrane covering the brain, that is the pia mater, in between these two membranes, we have a narrow space. And this narrow space between the dura mater and the pia mater is filled with cerebrospinal fluid that nourishes the brain cells and also acts as a shock absorber to the brain. And therefore, basically, nourishment means it supplies nutrients and oxygen to the brain cells, and it also removes the waste products from the brain cells. And that is basically about the three membranes covering the two membranes and the narrow space between the two membranes and their functions as well. Now, in summary class, we say that the membrane covering the brain they have the tough outermost membrane known as the dura mater, and the innermost membrane known as the pia mater, and the narrow space between these two membranes known as the arachnoid. And the arachnoid is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And this cerebrospinal fluid, it nourishes the brain cells, basically, meaning that it provides nutrients and oxygen to the brain cells, and in turn it removes waste products. And therefore, this also fluid provides it acts as a shock absorber for the brain. Let's go to the major parts of the brain. Structurally, the brain is divided into three parts. That is, we have the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The fore is the frontal part, the mid is the middle, and the hindbrain is the hind part of the brain. As you can see, class, this is the forebrain, and this is the midbrain, and therefore, that is the hind part of the brain. Very visual. Now let's look at the forebrain. What is the composition of the forebrain? The forebrain, class, is composed of the cerebral hemispheres. And when we say the cerebral hemispheres, we mean the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere. Now, let's look. Again, after that, we have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and as well the pituitary gland as the composition of the forebrain. Now let's crack down and see what each part of this forebrain does. Now the first one is called the cerebrum, which we say it is in two halves. That is the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere. Now this cerebrum, number one, it does integration of sensory impulses from the eyes, ears, and other sensory parts of the skin. Number two, it controls learning, memory, thinking, and as well personality, creativity, and all those things. It is being coordinated at the cerebrum. That is, the cerebrum does integration of sensory impulses from the brain, from the sense organs such as the eyes, ears, and other sensory organs in the skin. It controls the personality and individuality as well. It controls learning, memory, imagination, and as well creativity. That is the cerebrum. Let's go to the next one. The thalamus. The thalamus is the center for processing and integration of all sensory information. You say the thalamus is the center for processing and integration of all sensory information. Let's come to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, it controls, number one, secretion of hormones by pituitary gland. A very good example is about one role of the kidney that was about the balance of osmotic pressure. And we see that when the osmotic pressure of blood rises, what happens? The osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus detect this, and they trigger impulses that makes the pituitary gland to secrete more antidiuretic hormone into the blood. And once more antidiuretic hormone is released, this increases the permeability of the kidney tubules, whereby more water is absorbed from the kidney tubule back into the bloodstream, now bringing about secretion of little concentrated urine. Again, on the other hand, when the osmotic pressure of blood goes below normal, what happens? The osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus detect this, and they send impulses to the pituitary gland. Now the pituitary gland will lower the secretion of the antidiuretic hormone, which will in turn make the kidney tubules to be less permeable, meaning less water will be reabsorbed from the kidney tubules along the tubular walls into the bloodstream, and therefore it leads to secretion of more dilute urine. And that is briefly about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Let's go to another structural part of the brain, that is the midbrain. We basically say the midbrain is a small stalk that connects the forebrain and the hindbrain. It connects the forebrain and the hindbrain. It just serves as a connection. Now it also receives impulses from the eyes. Let's go to the last one, that is the hindbrain. The hindbrain is made of, number one, the cerebellum, the pons, as well the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata. Let's look at function of the cerebellum. The cerebellum controls the body balance and posture. It also controls the coordination and precision. For instance, a goalkeeper make coordination and precision on the direction of the ball that is going in the goal, and therefore is going to make the right direction and dives towards the ball to catch it. That is called the concept of precision and coordination. Or putting a thread in a needle, it also requires the concept of coordination and precision as well. Let's look at the pons. The pons act as a relay between the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. Now let's look at the medulla oblongata. What function does it serve? The medulla oblongata is found here below the pons. Now what is the function of the medulla oblongata? Number one, it controls the heartbeat and the heart rate. Number two, it also controls about blood circulation. It controls about sneezing, coughing, vomiting, and salivation as well. It also controls the breathing rate, and that is the medulla oblongata. Briefly, that is about the brain, the human brain. And we say that the human brain is a delicate sense organ encased in a bony structure known as the skull or the cranium, and is also found in the central nervous system. That is why we say that the brain is a delicate nervous organ encased in a bony structure that is known as the skull. And the brain is covered by membranes. That is the pia mater, the dura mater, and the arachnoid. The dura mater is the outer membrane covering the brain. The tough outer membrane covering the brain and is richly supplied with blood capillaries. The pia mater is the innermost membrane covering the brain, while the arachnoid is the narrow space between the dura mater and the pia mater, and it is filled with cerebrospinal fluid that brings nourishment to the brain cells, as well acts as a shock absorber. And the major parts of the brain is divided structurally is the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, and as their composition as well. Wish you all the best. Have a nice day. Thank you very much.